So, ladies and gentlemen, good morning, and thank you all for being here. Ben, thanks for that presentation, and Celia, thank you very, very much for laying the foundation, explaining the whole concept of the Jamaica Data Protection Act. So one of the things in preparing for this panel, and Ben didn't get into it as much, but one of the things that he had done was contributed to an IDB report book on the topic of trust. And as I did my preparation, I told the panel, I said, you know, folks, everyone here has participated in at least a dozen of these panels over the last 3 years around the topic of data protection and data privacy. And so one of the angles that I wanted to take it from is just this whole concept of trust by design. Right? We've heard of security by design, we've heard of privacy by design, and so in, you know, even taking a peep, our MC mentioned the conference in Davos, World Economic Forum. Their theme for 2024 is rebuilding trust. And so I challenge the team to consider and think about, against the backdrop of everything that we heard this morning, trust by design in the context of empowering Jamaica, building bridges for success. So I'm going to ask the cybersecurity experts first. I'm going to lean to our esteemed government representative who handles the management of JCERT to lead off with his thoughts around what is his office doing, for one, and then two, what should you consider in the activity, even the list of recommendations that Benjamin put out a while ago, a very long list, on building trust by design as we move into the 2024. Godfrey.
All right, thank you, Chris, and good morning to all here. The protocols having been established, we will just get into it. Now, the Jamaica Cyber Incident Response Team was created as a legacy entity out of the 2015 National Cybersecurity Strategy. However, what we recognized, particularly between the years of 2020 and 2022, is that we could not just remain a response capability within government. And so even though our primary focus has been non-law enforcement cyber incident response, we've had to pivot over those 2 years, which were the height of the pandemic, where the utilization of the internet for just about everything, or the hyper-digitalization of what we were doing, took place. So we grew into operating as a National Security Operations Center for cybersecurity, which really means that we're a fusion center for threat monitoring, and we do that through a host of sensors and feeds from partners, as well as the results of digital forensic examination. We also implemented, in consultation or collaboration with the Organization of American States, an early warning system linking our most critical assets in government, assets that are critical for the continuity of government. And we also do incident response, because the Jamaica Cyber Incident Response Team remains a part of that National Security Operations Center. We were able to achieve out of this increased collaboration and cooperation, and our being here this morning is testament to that. We now conduct significant threat intelligence and analysis of malware locally. So once upon a time, we had to depend on
Go ahead, sorry.
just the Latin American and Caribbean, or the Americas, in terms of data. We have our own homegrown data, as Ben would have shown, as Celia has shown. The data that we're using to drive our strategic and operational decisions now are not just adduced from some big data warehouse somewhere. It's what we're seeing in Jamaica as far as cybersecurity is concerned. We continue to do capacity building, and we do a threat situational analysis and create a threat picture for cybersecurity for government and those with whom we partner. And last but not least, the way we operate, the way we posture, lends some deterrence and speaks to our incident response readiness. So in a nutshell, Chris, that's what the JSER does for government at this point.
Thank you very, very much. So on the private sector side, Ryan, hearing everything that we heard this morning, knowing the work that you have gone out there and done, I mean, you used to teach this before, and now you're a practitioner in the field. You have gotten calls and responses over the last 2 years around a lot of this foundational cybersecurity work. Share on your side recommendations, observations around building this concept of trust.
Definitely. Hear me now? Okay,
Yeah,
good. All right, thank you, Chris. And again, welcome everyone. Thank you for having me. And just to answer that, what we've seen in the space, of course, is, where organizations are trying to build the trust, and we have to be the ones that, as the professionals, help to guide these institutions, right, and guide them well, because that's what, ideally they want out of an engagement. So, firstly, what we try to do, as Ben mentioned, is to try to ensure that persons conduct risk assessments, right, so that they actually understand their assets. They know what exists, and see what are the risks that are associated with each of these assets. Right? Because you have to know what your assets are and what are the risk levels that are there, so that you can know how to make them more robust, so that you can ensure that persons are trusting them. Right? Also, we have assisted organizations to implement different policies, and policies that may be more directed towards their organization, the type of organization that they operate in. So they would most likely utilize different frameworks. Could be from NIST, could be PCI, depending on what the organization again is all about. And these frameworks will now allow them, or allow us to create these policies for them, so that they're now able to ensure some level of assurance, and also where they're now able to conduct regular vulnerability assessments and penetration tests, because this is also very important. I usually like to use the scenario. You could be preparing for a subject or something. Let's carry me back to my teaching days now. You're teaching a concept for a number of months, but it's not until you do an assessment, you do a test, that's when you actually find what have you actually been learning. All right? So you have to conduct these vulnerability assessments. You have to also take it a step further, because a lot of persons think, okay, we buy a tool and we now just run a vulnerability assessment ourselves on our environment, and we now see the results and we say, okay, let's nip those in the bud and we're good. But conducting a penetration test is taking it a step further, understanding what from that assessment can actually be exploited. And then also not just what comes back on a scan, but also going through the business process flow of applications and trying to break that process flow. So I'll use a typical example. Let's say, for instance, it's an internet banking application that we're dealing with. If you're saying then that you have to now enter your RSA token to complete the transaction, and someone is able to bypass putting in an RSA token, that is breaking a business process flow. And that is a serious implication on the application and on the business. So among that, we also ensure that we conduct security awareness sessions for organizations, and getting employees trained up. So Ben mentioned that people are the weakest link, and that is true. We're the ones that we say, listen, do not click a link unless you trust it. And who clicks the link? We click the link. All right? We might see something like redundancy list for 2024, and we're like, Lord of mercy, am I on this list? And you click the link. All right? It's those little things that you have to be aware of. And just to kind of cut it short, we also embed our security analysts in some cases in your organization, because what we realize is for organizations that do a lot of development, they tend to put security at the end. It's an afterthought, right? So you'll have a product that is released, and when the product is now released, that is when you're now saying, all right, let us check to see if it is secure. At that point, it might be a little harder for you to now go back to the drawing board and try to fix things. So it's better to embed security from the very beginning when you're doing your requirements gathering, and you can now get security suggestions in from that point so that you can have a very robust system going forward.
Yeah, man. So there's a saying that has been attributed to the boxer Mike Tyson. Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. And COVID came and punched us in the face, and a lot of people who thought they had a plan, they realized the plan didn't work. So Ryan, one of the things you're talking about is this response plan. Ladies and gentlemen, some of your own organizations in here have no plan. Some of your own organizations in here are part of that percentage that says that it ain't going to happen to me, there is no risk. And we have to change that mindset. So I'm going to ask my privacy practitioners on the other side of the table, starting with Georgia, against the backdrop of what we've heard, going back to something that Ben Roseth had wrote in an article around trust and digital transformation and all of this technology that we're talking about, is that there's a lot of people that they are hesitant to put in technology solutions simply because there is this lack of trust and either understanding of how it works or just understanding of, and I think the example you gave a while ago, people clicking on the wrong link and then bad things happen. Our MC gave us a scenario that happens to a lot of people. So Georgia, sorry, the correct name. Georgia, give us a little example of the context with respect to how do you approach your customers, especially in our cultural difference when there's a caution, there's hesitancy around applying, going digital with all the concerns that they have.
Okay, so where I'd like to begin is for us to recognize we often talk about how people are the weakest link, and that's true. But if we think about trust by design and everything that we have been talking about in terms of the risk that that face businesses in this kind of framework, we have to get people and businesses to recognize that this whole concept of trust is about people. It's about you, so you have to individualize it. And when you begin to individualize this idea of trust, you want trust, and it takes you as an individual to build trust. And then you take that idea up to the business level, and in that context, because you're asking yourself, what do I want from businesses? So in that same article that you spoke about, there was this idea of between tension and personalization. So I remember smiling recently when I went to purchase something online. And honestly, by that time, I was very tired. And I was relieved that there was an algorithm somewhere in there that found something for me based on what I was looking at before. But yet still, behind that is the idea that what they have done is that they have taken information about me to present something to me. And that's good. But where it gets murky and where the regulation needs to be taking place, especially in the context of the data privacy law, is the idea that information, as we have been saying, is an asset, and the idea that it can be exploited. So it seems to me that there's a lot in the use of technology, whether it be AI that we have been talking about a lot, or just information technology. There's a lot in information technology that we desire. But in order for us to break down those barriers, each person in the organization, that's why what I say to them, we have to build a culture of privacy. And that is why I like the theme as well, because it talks about building bridges for success. And we have to understand, for example, that even the Data Privacy Act, sometimes we don't realize it, or the Data Protection Act, it's a facilitator for trade. And if as people in Jamaica that we don't get to that point where each person and each business acknowledge that we are major players. It's about us, but at the same time that we are major players in creating that environment of trust, in terms of changing our mindset, in terms of how we protect information and the information that we collect, then it will also affect Jamaica's ability to trade. And if it affects Jamaica's ability to trade on the micro level, then it affects each business. So I always start out by saying to people, anytime we start talking about information or the use of technology and this whole idea of trust, because it's inherent in us that we want to be private. We were brought up that way. But in order to benefit or to take advantage of the benefits that are associated with privacy, even before we get to what the risks are, we have to ourselves recognize that we are a part of building that trust. So that's how I deal with trust by design.
Yeah. Well, design privacy, trust by design, there seems to be a connection there. Give us your take and give us your recommendations to this audience.
Thanks, Chris. And good morning, all. Hi, Camille. Right. So this is something I nearly took for granted. So we are design privacy, and our motto is, we help you comply with privacy laws and build trust. So embedded in our DNA is this concept of building trust. Although we took that approach, did we sit down and ask ourselves, okay, what do we mean when we say build trust? How do you build trust? What are you trying to build trust around? Who are the stakeholders when we're speaking about building trust? And so, because we took it, well, I took it for granted up until this morning, it forced me to really focus on that issue. And in the data protection world, who are the stakeholders when we say building trust? So the primary user of personal data are companies, entities, government. They need to interact with their stakeholders. They need to interact with customers, they need to attract customers, they need to retain customers. They need to retain good talent. First, they need to be able to attract the best talent, and they need to be able to retain that talent. So for me, those are some of the primary stakeholders when we're speaking about building trust. Entities that process personal data need to be able to build trust among those persons whose personal data they use. How do you go about building that trust? Interestingly, the Data Protection Act and the entire legislative framework is that tool that has been created to build trust. It is actually the tool, so if followed, if implemented, if appreciated, you'd realize that's the secret. The essence of the data protection framework is two things: fairness and transparency. Think about it on a personal level. How do you build trust with another individual? Well, something I would personally say about myself is that it's very difficult for me to trust another individual because I can't promise you that I know what I would personally do when faced with a situation. If you were to extrapolate that, you need to be able to know something about a third party before you can build that trust. So that is where transparency really kicks in. And what does transparency mean in the context of data protection? We are speaking about, and we're going to touch on the design part as well. The trust by design means instead of having customers and employees wondering about what you're doing with their personal data, now that we are aware, now that 94% of us know that the Data Protection Act is going and there are all these cybersecurity breaches, people are asking, but wait, this company have my personal data, the government have my personal data. What them really doing with my data? Who is using my data? Who is spying on me? Who is tracking my every movement? Who is making money off of me? So transparency means complying with the first data processing standard. Letting your stakeholders know what data you're collecting from them, what you're doing with it, and who you're sharing it with. So the law mandates you to inform your stakeholders of that. So while the data subject has the rights to ask you what you're doing with it, you tell the world. And that is where we get into the design part. Don't be reactive. Don't let them have to ask a question. Present the information to them. And again, when you take it back to yourself, not only do we need to know about the person, it also has to be some sort of equity or fairness between how you operate. And again, that is what the Data Protection Act requires of us to do. Be fair and transparent in how we use data. And so for design privacy, now that you forced me to think about it, that is how we build privacy by trust by design.
Thank you very much. So folks, the minister under which the Office of Information, well, officially it's under the Office of the Prime Minister, right? Well, we do have a minister, Minister Dana Morris Dixon, that presented recently giving the nation, what we call it now, a 6-month grace period. So there's confusion around what this grace period means. And I'm going to...
No, that's true.
Okay, I'm not going to ask these guys to clarify what 6 months means. However, there's been question and confusion around what the 6 months means. I don't have another seat here for the Information Commissioner, but sadly, a number of organizations have taken the 6 months grace period as time to relax and come off the gas. And I've had to assist in some clarification with some folks recently. No, the 6 months period is a time to jump on the gas because all of a sudden you've been given a little bit more time for compliance. A media practitioner came to me just last week, wanted to know, seeing that December 1 has been postponed. I said, stop, don't go any further. December 1 was not postponed. The Data Protection Act was enforced. There are only about 5 or 6, Celia, I don't know if you remember, there's 6 clauses that are given the grace period, but the majority of the act is enforced. So there's no grace period in terms of continuing to do the work for compliance.
And
so
there's a gazette that has been published re-emphasizing the fact that it is in effect and the portal is up and people are supposed to be registering on the portal and then awaiting confirmation from the...
The next steps that people need to do is to go to the website, the oic.gov.jm, and start the process. Every business that processes people's private data needs to start that process now. Right now. There's no time to wait. You've been given grace period to catch up. That's what we need to be using this time for. So against that backdrop, I'm going to just ask against our cybersecurity folks, based upon the work that you have been doing around helping people comply with the Act, if you were to just rattle off 3 to 4 recommendations, I know Ben had a lot of them on his chart a while ago, but what should people be going back to telling their bosses, or if they are the boss, what you should actually be talking to your team about? Guys, we're given 6 months grace period. The Act is enforced. We can be held well to some sort of offenses within 6 months if that doesn't happen. What would you recommend? Who wants to take it off? Go ahead.
So, Chris, the big challenge here is one of the things that Ben sort of glossed over. But Ryan picked it up again, and really it is, what is it that you are protecting? What are your digital assets? What data do you have for persons? It's all good and well to say personally identifiable information, but do you also have medical identifiable information? Do you have health, financial information? And so when we think about it, the first recommendation would be you must do that audit. You must understand what your digital treasures are. Because you might not have the resources to protect your entire organization, but certainly if you understand what your digital assets are, you can prioritize. You can phase within that 6 months how you actually bring this thing on board so that you're looking not just at what you probably already have stored, but you're also looking at your capture points. You're looking at your transmission systems. You're looking at your storage facilities. You're ensuring that, especially if you're moving PII or any of the other I's into cloud infrastructure, you understand where they're headquartered, what jurisdiction it obtains, whether or not there are privacy laws that would supersede our own DPA 2020. That audit will give you that snapshot of this is where my entity is, this is what I have to apply to this as far as resources are concerned, and this is how I can begin the process. Secondly, you must, as Georgia said, invest in your people. You must ensure that they appreciate where their station in the company impacts the compliance with the Data Protection Act. And if you look particularly at Standard 7, there is a raft of things that need to be done. And thirdly, you have to ensure that you're willing and able to facilitate queries and challenges and the right of the data subject to ensure correctness of that data. So you must put those plans in place. Those would be my top 3 recommendations.
So you made mention of Standard 7, and Standard 7, folks, speaks to technical measures and operational measures. So on one half of the room, we have the technical measures, and on the other half of the room, we have the, I guess we can call it, the business and other measures. So I'm going to ask Georgia, with respect to Privacy and Legal Management Consultants Limited, the work that you have been doing, helping people to comply, what are the major gaps you see out there, and what are the recommendations you need to just get in these people's heads? Okay,
so the major gaps I'm seeing are consistent with this slide that had gone up to say 7% of the persons of Jamaica fully compliant. I think it's 47% partially and 49% none at all. Right. And that 47%, it actually took some pulling of teeth to get them to be partially compliant. Yes. And for the others, they are still outside saying it doesn't apply to them. So there's some lack of clarity there. So for want of a better advice, I think that if you were to take away anything, let your bosses know that once they deal with personal information, that is information that can identify any of you, any natural person, once they process that kind of information, meaning, and process really means handling the information, like looking at the information, moving it from one part of your computer to another. then the act applies to them. In effect, it applies to everyone. Another challenge that I've had is businesses will call me and say, I want to appoint a DPO, or I don't need your services because I've appointed a DPO. Now, that's the biggest misconception. And so the DPO is an independent, conflict-free individual or consultant, because it can be an employee or an external person who is hired to protect, in effect, the data subject rights. So they interface with the data subjects, they interface with the information commissioner, and they check your systems or audit your systems for compliance. To get persons to understand it better, I will say to them, your DPO is almost like your internal auditor. Now, even though your DPO is trying to get you to be compliant, is really so that he does not have to report you to the information commissioner. So apart from your DPO, you do need what we either call a chief privacy officer or a privacy officer, someone who is responsible for implementing your privacy program. Two different persons, your DPO, that's not their role. Okay, so that's the second thing. The third thing, sticking to the DPO as well, what I have found is that they usually have insufficient resources, sometimes not enough expertise. They do not have, which they must have, a direct channel of communication to the to management. Management, and just generally now, insufficient resources for the DPO, and also insufficient resources across the organization dedicated to privacy. So privacy implementation has replaced lawyers in a sense, because there was a time when IT and lawyers were at the bottom of the budget. And so we have been encouraging people, it's okay, keep the lawyers at the bottom of the budget if you must, because probably it's when you get into problems that you may want a lawyer, although it's not advisable. But at the very least, because the consequences of non-compliance with the data protection law are so severe for the business, from reputational harm and just business resilience overall, and the trust that we have been talking about, you need to allocate those resources, and you need to put implementing privacy at the top of your budget and take it seriously. And it doesn't mean, so when I talk about having someone to implement your privacy program apart from your DPO, we are not suggesting, because we do know we have SMEs, we are not suggesting that you necessarily have to go out there and hire a new employee. As I said, you can outsource. Or in the alternative, remember, you have also, a lot of businesses already have a compliance department, so you tag on the responsibilities. And since I'm talking about tagging on, and so that people do not see me and accost me about it, with a little bit more pay to implement the privacy program. That is what I would, the takeaways from me that I would recommend to you.
Thank you very much. So ladies and gentlemen, we have a mic right there. Please prepare a question or two and come up if you, I see the gentleman come to turn on the mic. So whilst the mic gets prepared, Chuck, before I ask Chuck a question, I'm just reminding everyone, right in front of us right here, we have two of Jamaica's leading privacy practitioners, Chuck Cameron and I was about to say Meg Gibson. Can I call it? No. Georgia Gibson Henley. You know, people from a long time, you know their nicknames, sorry. Georgia. So we have the two leading privacy practitioners in the country, and we have also the two leading cybersecurity, one on the government side and one on the private sector side. So please, if you have any questions, just come up to the mic right now and ask your questions. Chuck, what are you finding when you go into organizations, where are you finding the big gaps right now in terms of Standard 7, the organizational measures?
The perspective of what data protection is, it's always leaning to the left. It's always leading to an IT issue. And once, Georgia would have said that you often have IT and lawyers at the end of this, at the bottom of the scale. And you would have also heard Georgia say, to be able to implement an effective data protection compliance program, you must have direct access, I would say, to the board, because, and it is, and I've gratuitously called out Camille when you gave me the floor, but we need to understand when we're speaking about corporate governance, one of the, and I'm not a corporate governance expert in no way, but part of corporate governance is really, to my mind, be able to instill confidence in shareholders, in the market, that when you invest in this company, we are faithful, diligent custodians of your investment. And how we do that is by identifying and managing all the primary risks that face the business. There are very few more greater risk than a data protection risk to the company from a compliance perspective. And so it is incumbent on the very strong, robust corporate governance movement in Jamaica to understand that, because not to understand that, we may actually be doing a disservice to the same companies that we're serving, because it cannot be, this can put your director in jail, this can expose the company to over 6% of your gross revenue. The information commissioner, if she's not satisfied that you have adequately implemented the data processing standards, can tell your organization to stop processing personal data until you have adequately implemented those controls. If those aren't risks worthy to be considered by a board, I don't know what is. When we speak about risk, though, I don't want us to get caught up on the risk to the business, because that is not even what data protection is about. That's not data protection. Data protection is about managing the risk to your stakeholders, managing the privacy risk to your employees, managing the privacy risk to your employees. So it's just that lack of appreciation of what data protection is all about that we find to be one of the greatest issues. You can only implement a strong program where you have the chairman and the board and the CEO owning it and championing it.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, the floor is open for questions. Don't all chase at the same time, please. But we would love to hear a question or two for our panel.
Morning. My name is Sandra Samuel, CEO, Total Email. Okay. This sounds a little expensive. And within Jamaica, where compliance even becoming a company is very minimal, those of us who are compliant, now what I'm seeing in my industry, which is the beauty industry, is that my cost just went up quite a bit, and I'm competing with persons who are not even registered as a company. Can anybody tell me what's like a ballpark figure of what this is going to be looking like to cost? When I hear talks about this, sounds like more employment to continue to be compliant and all of that. So I'm interested to know what is happening with those persons who only operate online, those persons who are not in brick and mortar. This is a wide, it spans a wide area. However, many persons are not even captured in the Jamaican companies act, I would say. So how does that work exactly? How do you remain competitive with this situation?
So, well, you asked pointedly in terms of cost, What I would say to you is that, well, yes, you are correct. It is expensive, but negotiate, because one size doesn't fit all in terms of the cost. Because if I tell you the cost now, it would frighten you. But you said you are totally male, and although I've not ever been to your establishment, my suspicion, for example, is that it is not as big, for example, as probably even the PSOJ in terms of staffing or the data that you process. That's what we are talking about. So you have to have that conversation so that a package can be tailored for you. And I know, for example, that Chuck had done something, and we are all working on code and the software that are specifically geared at small businesses. How do you remain compliant? You asked that question. So you don't have to hire someone, as I had indicated earlier. Consider whether you may need a consultant coming in from time to time. In your case, probably you may process sensitive personal data based on what my assumptions are. And so it seems to me that, like, if you were to go and hire, you would have to hire a DPO, definitely, and you would still need someone to implement and monitor for you. So in your case, for example, I would say to you, no, don't go out and hire someone. Look for one of the privacy practitioners out there and have a discussion and tailor a package that works for you and that will cause you to remain compliant. That's my short answer to you.
All right, so the organizers are signaling that I only have a very short time, so I'm going to take 2 more questions as the 2 persons line up. Go ahead, sir.
I'm typically an IT guy, but I'm going to ask something more geared towards the folks at the bottom of the heap, the lawyers, and the information, the information commissioner. So I had a little interaction at a government agency recently, and I wanted to know, a lot of our data, especially in government services, are still our data collection and storage is still heavily paper-based, right? So the question is, what is the approach for security people's information in that type of a scenario? What protection individuals get under the law, right, dealing with paper-based, because we are a far way from having most of our data electronic. So how do we address that?
Well, first of all, the Data Protection Act applies to paper-based systems as well as electronic systems. So although it came about in the context of the processing power of electronic systems, it still applies if your information is in paper-based. From my understanding and interactions in this space, in any event, I am aware that the ministries, departments, and agencies of government and other agencies, they are in fact exploring like artificial intelligence with the appropriate risk remediation measures, as well as things like blockchain. Certainly not yet that I'm aware of in Jamaica, but there are other countries that are exploring that as well as a means. I'm not saying that there aren't risks associated with them, but everyone, and speaking of Jamaica, and critical sectors that I'm aware of, they are in fact exploring. Since I'm in the courts, I can actually say that I was supposed to pick up a judgment yesterday, and it was postponed because there was going to be a meeting with data protection providers. So that should give you some consolation to say that government appears to be aware of their obligations and are acting on it. And we were all a part of a seminar put on by the Office of Information Commissioner, where there were about 300 attendees from ministries, departments, and agencies as well. So you can see that the move is on, sir.
So part of the question was how. This goes back to basic security measures, controls It is more expensive if you're going to fulfill your data subject rights, but are these files, paper-based files, under lock and key? Are these paper-based files exposed from fire hazards or flood hazards? Do you have a log to access these paper-based files? Is it same type of controls that have to be implemented, but in a physical world? When a data subject wants to exercise his right and say, you need to tell me what you have within the ministry within 30 days, that is when costs are incurred, because it's much more efficient if you have entered that information appropriate in a digital system to recover that information, as opposed to serve all the archives across Jamaica. So regardless of whether it's paper or digital, you have to implement similar protective controls, and it is more costly in the physical space.
Godfrey, you want to add anything coming from the Office of the Prime Minister?
Well, it's really to put a cap on what both Georgia and Chuck have said. The physical cyber nexus for security cannot be ignored. It really speaks to who have access to your building. Do you have versioning on your files? Do you have access controls to the rooms that house your files? When you have copiers, is there features enabled, configurations put in place to prevent the copying of certain documents? Do you have on your email system data loss protection configurations enabled so that persons can't email certain types of files out of the organization? Do you have your USB ports locked down so that people can't just dump data onto USB drives and walk out with it? Do you still use CD or DVR burners so people can't just burn data and leave with it? So that physical aspect of it really is something that has to be there. You know, does the security in your building know who should be there and who should be where in the building and what they should have access to? These are the things that really are going to be critical as we transition from that largely paper-based to a more digital setup.
All right, thank you. Run to the questions, because the signal time people are waving to me.
All right, I am hoping I could get away with at least 2 questions.
One.
Just one? I will try. All right, good morning, good afternoon. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kelia Phillips. I am a IT student at the University of the Commonwealth Caribbean, and I'm also a worker in the Innovation Center. My question to you, Ms. Georgia, is that in Jamaica as a society, we tend to be very reluctant when it comes to technological advancement. And so this can be seen both at the top and at the bottom of the organizational hierarchy. I'm wondering, what can the heads of these organizations do to ensure that down to the very last man that interacts, even in passing with data subjects' personal and sensitive personal data, that they are concerned and they are actively ensuring that the data subjects' rights are protected? And that is my question.
Training and awareness and continuous auditing and monitoring. So training and awareness in relation to the rights of the data subject, the controls that you put in place, how they interact with the data, and then you do continuous auditing to ensure that there is compliance and monitoring. And that's very important actually, because just overall, we have to recognize that the data protection framework, it's an accountable framework. It's not enough to say, I've put in a system, when they come into audit or if there's a data breach, you have to be able to demonstrate that you are in compliance and that you did all of these things. So creating that culture of privacy and awareness, I would say that's my short answer.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right, last question.
Hello everyone. My name is Sharon Chisholm. I'm legal counsel at Digital Group. My question is not actually for the panel, but for the Information Commissioner. So we understand that the Data Protection Act was implemented December 2023, sorry. But I think the question is, or there needs to be some more clarity around when does enforcement of penalties begin? Because there seems to be some confusion, and in-house clients are asking, well, there is a 6-month period, grace period granted for registration, But the Data Protection Act is not real because it's not being enforced at the moment. So my question is, what is the plan for the Office of the Information Commissioner to actually begin implementation and enforcement of penalties?
No offense to the panel, but since most of the room is this way. All right, very good question, and thank you, because I know it's something that many persons are curious about, and we have tried to answer by phone, email, and in other fora. As it relates to the timing for enforcement, most persons would like a specific date that they can use as a deadline and say, well, this is when I'm to do it by. Firstly, there isn't an exact date per se at this time, and I do not mind not having a deadline approach. It is the unfortunate reality that the culture of Jamaica is when you have a deadline, you wait on that deadline to act. It is a poor practice, it is a negative practice, and it is not a practice that we are going to support as an organization. So what you have is a legal obligation that is already here, that is already in force, that already calls upon you to fulfill certain obligations, that has already granted your data subjects rights against you. So whether or not I or my office takes a big stick policy to come at you, you have those obligations, and there are persons that can act against you. My office cannot exercise any discretion or leeway or go light when a data subject says, well, you have violated my right and I'm going to court. So wait on me to come at you with penalties or recognize that your data subject can come at you with a lawsuit that is more expensive than my measly penalty that you complain about. So that's the first thing that I would see. What persons need to focus on right now is that you have 6 months that has been granted because, one, there's a general state of unreadiness on many sides, but two, because that unreadiness has been due in large part to delay and delinquents already. It is not going to be sustained. It is not going to last forever. You were late for the December 1 deadline. You do not want to be late for the expiration of the 6-month period. Is it possible that in 6 months we will not be fully enforcing every single provision because of whatever reason? Technically, yes. But what if it is possible? What if it is possible, and what if 6 months from December 1, 2023, we reach out to any single one of you? The fact is, I saw the statistics saying, okay, 48% think they're half ready, and how many percent thinks they're ready? Let me just tell you, realistically, there's a misconception of what readiness really requires. There's a lack of understanding as to how all the requirements of compliance play out. And so if you think you're ready, you're wrong. Don't wait for a D-Day for enforcement. Focus on the requirements for compliance. Start making the investment of effort, of energy, of resources. Put the necessary systems in place, one step at a time, one task at a time. I heard the question as to what is it going to cost, and honestly my response was, what does it matter? There is a cost. It is not going to be free. Like everything else, you start from the basis of your resources. If you were building a house and you wanted a 5-bedroom house that was going to cost you $50 million, but what you had was $5 million today, would you not start your foundation, start putting up the walls, work on getting the additional finances and building out that house over time? It's a similar process. Compliance has various components. Look at your organization, assess your needs, get an estimate as to what it will cost you, look at your budget, where are you now, what do you have? Start biting off the little chunks, start with your policies, start with your procedures, start building the culture that the panel has talked about. Then you add the different cybersecurity measures, you add the other technical measures. You start digitizing those paper records that person say, oh, but everything is on paper. Okay, start by scanning your most current that you use every day. And then you work on adding the others over time. It can be done, and that is the message and that is the focus. Let us together, collaboratively, on either side, get it done little by little as we go forward, because we don't have the choice not to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Barkley. Fantastic. Thank you. I see one gentleman said that he's trying to squeeze in a question. I'm going to ask the panel to just get ready. I'm going to start with Ryan, just asking everybody for their last word before we end. Very, very quick question. The people on the back ask me if I'm mad. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. I'm Junior Darrell. I'm with Optimity Group. We're also cybersecurity and data privacy practitioners. And to my colleagues here, I think we can agree that this sector kind of needs a bit of a break. I have customers, some of them in this room, who initially when you quote them on the services to comply with the measures, they run. Because it is expensive and it has been acknowledged several times. So what is the PSOJ, maybe this is a question for you, doing to help to maybe lobby the government to help to ensure that these services can become more affordable and accessible? Because you can only trim your margin so much and no more. So that's my question here for everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
So one of the first things that we did was the survey, right? That's one of the actual first things we did. And that survey informed a lot of people, and that survey also informed the minister to create that 6-month grace period per se. So that's one of the things that we have done. Now in terms of what else we can do, what was your suggestion? Any suggestions as to what do you think a membership organization can do? One of the other things also is partnering with folks to give us information. So we did in fact have an event recently with the Information Commissioner and her team. We had 500 plus attendees, and the Information Commissioner went through details as to what needs to be done. So, and hosting a forum like this is another thing that the PSOJ is doing to inform and educate folks as to what needs to be done. But
what free? Oh, from government.
So here is a self-help solution. We now have to. It requires us to operate with standards in a normalized way. If it is you're a member of an industry and you're an individual practitioner, if it is you are a member of an industry and you're an individual practitioner, best practice demands that you follow best practice, and you just don't stand up your business and you're doing something. If it is you are following the same processing activities, you can then think about spreading the cost of compliance, because if all dentists are following the same processing activities, dependent on how that service provider has structured the delivery of his service or her service, they may be in a better position to be able to treat an organization. Or the PSOJ, for example, could say, if you are in this industry and you have standardized your services against best practices, there is definitely a group rate that can be achieved, because the question is, this is a high-touch implementation activity, but where processes are standardized as they ought to be, it would make compliance easier for an individual.
So let me just also throw in this, Darrell. So I had a meeting recently with the Danish Data Protection Authority. What we did December 1, they did in the 1970s, right? So they're 44, 45 years, and we just started a few months ago. So Jamaica and businesses in Jamaica need to realize that we're unbecoming a developed nation, and this is growing pains, right? So what these folks have forgotten about, we don't even learn yet, right? But her suggestion was an organization like the PSOJ should sit with the Information Commissioner to partner with helping our members be compliant. In what way, however? By taking some of the requirements off of the office's plate and put it into membership organizations' plate. So membership organizations like the PSOJ, like the Jamaica Chamber of Commerce, like the Jamaica Hotel and Tourist Association, I know a representative is here, like the Jamaica Bankers Association. So these associations all collect data. They all collect personal data. So is there a way, so for example, if there is a, and I don't know if there is any kind of association for personal services similar to what was spoken about a while ago, that associations can come together, and similar to what Chuck was saying, is that there is a way now to spread the costs and let it more approachable. But folks, this is, I think, any new situation that comes in a region, in a country, and there's new laws, there's going to be that speed bump of costs that we have to overcome to adhere to it. So I'm going to ask the panel just for their last word around recommendations, suggestions for our attendees here, and then we end. Ryan, starting with you.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, my last set of words would be, just be informed. I'd start with just knowing what your assets are, know what you need to protect, know what it's going to cost you, right? Because it may not necessarily be as expensive as other entities. At least know, so you know what to do, right? And then, of course, if you want to exercise trust and you want to enforce compliance, seek the professionals, right? We're here to assist.
The government remains a facilitator with respect to cybersecurity. And through the National Security Operations Center, the services we provided are free of cost. However, we are a small team, and so we treat with it on a prioritized basis. But as far as vulnerability assessment, penetration testing, those basic things that we can assist you with, reach out to us before the event occurs, and we will help you. If you reach out to us after the event occurs, we'll still help you, but it will be a bit more costly. So make it a team sport, collaborate with us. The MSSPs are here to assist, and we can help you to get cyber secure.
Thank you.
Use the Data Protection Act as a tool to build trust in your brand and actually help you in that digital transformation process. It is a tool that has set out the roadmap for you.
Thank you.
Well, because a big touch point here is cost, the way my last word would be I know it's complicated, it's frightening, but try to relate it to something that you're already familiar with. So if I use Total Email, I'm sure your documents are not strewn all over the place, right? So they are in filing cabinets. Attend forums such as this. Do what you can. So you don't have to hire a professional, for example, to do the whole hog. You're attending these forums, you're getting information. You hire the professional to look at, what your gaps are. What do I have? What gaps are? And just actually to consult on, how can I fill these gaps that I have? But some of you are actually already doing some of the things, so it's also looking at the existing policies and trying to fill those gaps. And that is why I explained earlier, talk to your privacy professionals, have a conversation, and then tailor something that is right-sized for you.
Panel, thank you very much, and I hope that we asked the right questions, and I hope that there was some new information that you received today that you could take back and make some actions. So ladies and gentlemen, thanks for coming.